You can't do it, coach it. For some people, that means they, instead of playing a sport, they coach a sport, etc. Unless you're Jason Garrett, then you don't do either one. There's a game today, okay? So let's just get it out there. There's a game today. All right? We don't have a chance. You're going to win. I'll still be cheering for the Cowboys. But here's what I want you to know. When it comes to things that I can coach but not do, I can tell you all the things that you can do when your team is playing to not yell at the television. Right? I can tell you that it's just a game and it doesn't matter, and you really, in the big picture of life, it's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. Just move on. Right? I can tell you that yelling at the TV does not help your coach hear you, or your quarterback, or your team, or the referees. Right? And I can even tell you that you can go through some yogic meditation to prepare for the game so that you'll be calm in spirit when it happens. And I can teach you all of that, but I can't do any of it. Okay? I give you my word today, I'll be yelling at people who can't hear me. Right? Because I can tell you what you should do, but I can't really do it when it comes to football. All right? So I tell you that because today, as we move through the Sermon on the Mount, we're getting to a point where it's a lot easier for me to teach you how to do it than it is to do it. Okay? So we've been talking about how Jesus would live my life. So for me, it means, how would Jesus be a pastor? How would Jesus go on campus and teach? How would Jesus be a husband or a father or a friend? And how would that look in this world? And so you need to put that on yourself. How would Jesus live your life? What would that look like? And so the Sermon on the Mount, he's teaching us, this is what you can become as my follower. This is what you have the ability to be. This is who you can be if you are willing to try and willing to surrender to me and let me lead your life. And so he's been setting this incredibly high bar. He's been saying, you know what, as you follow me, you can become all of these things. And then today, it's just one of those, I'm going to tell you what it says. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you what it says. And I'm just going to confess up front that the first half of this is just really, really hard. Okay? So we're going to look at the turn the other cheek passage. Matthew chapter 5, verse 38, page 970 if you're using the Pew Bible. So Jesus has been telling us all of these different things that we should do as we interact with other people. And then he gets to this. All right, now I will say that I think we misinterpret this partly, but maybe we can find some clarity today. Matthew chapter 5, verse 38. It's titled an eye for an eye, and it probably really should be titled humility. Matthew 5, 38. You have heard that it was said, eye for an eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. All right, anybody mastered this? Got it down, piece of cake, right? All right, so let's go through and let's see what Jesus is really saying, because I think there is a little confusion, because we look at this and the first thing we think of is there is somebody standing in front of me just pelting me with blows, and I'm just supposed to stand there and take it. I mean, that's what we, right? I mean, that's kind of what we see. That's not what Jesus is talking about here. And so we'll talk about love for enemies later, but here's what's going on. So verse 38, you have heard that it was said, eye for an eye and tooth for tooth. So what you have in the law is you have this idea that whatever is taken from you, you have a right to get from someone else, or vice versa. So for example, if someone would have killed one of your sheep, the person who did that is responsible by law to pay you back for the sheep or give you a new sheep. Right? And the idea is that whatever happens to you and whatever happens to someone, you're going to be paid back exactly what you should be. And there are two reasons for that. One is you deserve to get that back. The other, though, is so that you don't overpay back. Right? Because in human nature, if someone kills one of my sheep, I'm going to kill 10 of yours. Right? That's how human nature works. And so the law was set up so that whatever happens to you, you can be repaid back exactly what you're owed. Nothing more, nothing less. And so they had this system. So if somebody knocks out your tooth, that person gets to get their tooth knocked out. Right? If someone causes you to lose a sight in an eye, they get to lose a sight in one of their eyes. And the law is just very specific about this. And it's amazing. So, but it's all a matter of keeping everything equal, if you will. All right? And so the law was set up so that people wouldn't overcharge or overpay back, and also so that people, when they lost something, they would be reimbursed. In fact, it goes into great detail. If you have a slave and you cause them to lose sight in one eye, you have to set them free. I mean, wow. Okay, that's a trade-off, I guess. Right? And so the law is very specific about those things. All right? But really, when you look at the whole passage, the whole paragraph of what Jesus is saying, this isn't about somebody just pelting you and you standing there, take it. Right? And eye for eye, tooth for tooth, we get that in our minds. That sounds logical. That sounds right. But Jesus says, but I want you to look, as you follow me, at something different. All right? And so the first thing he's going to talk about is that we should, through our actions, are you ready? Love those who are difficult to love. He gives three illustrations, right? So, 3 illustrations. The first one is, I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. The idea behind that is someone would take their right hand and come backhanded across your face. Now, what's the natural reaction to that? Bam! Right back. But here you have to understand culturally what's going on. When you were to do that in the Jewish culture, what you were saying to the crowd that saw this take place is, I am above this person. So it may have been this person had come and asked someone for money. And the person just, I want everybody to know I'm above him. And it was a sign. It was if we would say, if someone were to ask us for money or ask us for help, and we would say, hey, everybody listen. This person's lazy and won't work. And I want you to see that I'm better than they are. And that's really what the backhand would be. It would be a proclamation that I am better than you. And so what Jesus says, though our natural inclination would be to stand up and smack them back and say, no, you're not better than me, is to turn the other cheek. And if they want to smack that one too, it's okay. Wait a minute. Jesus is saying, you know what? Your status in society, it's not a big deal to me. Where you stand, everybody's watching, I'm not worried about that. What I am worried about is you representing me. And when someone decides that you're lower than them, in humility, accept that place. Again, I'm telling you it's not easy, but it is the teaching. So he uses a second example. He says, if someone sues you for your shirt, give them your coat as well. What they may do is say, all right, we have this disagreement, but you know what? I'm going to win in court. I'm going to take the shirt off your back. And your response will be, here's my shirt. Take my coat as well. In the kingdom of Jesus Christ, in humility, we're to put others above ourselves. It's consistent throughout Scripture. Jesus was talking to his disciples one time, and he said, you know, among the heathen, those who are in charge lord over those beneath him, but among you, it's going to be quite different. If you want to be a leader in my kingdom, you will be a servant. And if you want to be at the very top, you be a slave. And Jesus says this revolutionary idea in my kingdom, when somebody wants to put you below them, in humility you accept it. Now, partially, he was getting them ready for the persecution that was to come. Because they were going to lose their lives, and they were going to give up their lives and give up their freedom because of him. He said, take it. Take it. Well, then he gives a third illustration, and he says, if someone asks you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. The idea was, in Roman teaching, a Roman citizen had the right to ask someone who was not a Roman citizen, actually the right to tell them, I have a heavy pack. I want you to carry it for me. And so they had mile markers on the road. It was actually 1,000 paces. And if someone said, you by law have to carry my pack, say gladly, I not only carry it 1 mile, I'll carry it 2. Because as a servant, as a follower of Jesus Christ in humility, when people want to be above you, you let them stay there. Whew. Again, I can tell you what it says. I can tell you what it means. To practice it, that's different. Because Jesus said, in my kingdom, it's different. You're going to have the ability to let people who think they're better than you keep on thinking that. I was reading this week, I was reminded of a story of Corrie ten Boom. I'm sure some of you know that story. She lived in Holland during World War II, and she and her family hid Jews. And eventually they were caught, and she and her sister were put in a concentration camp. Her sister ended up dying there. And so after the war was over, she survived. She went all across Europe talking about forgiveness. She was a believer. She went and talking about forgiveness. Well, one day in Germany, she gave this message about forgiveness. And in the crowd was a man who was one of the guards at her concentration camp. And she recognized him. So I'm going to read it to you because I'll mess it up, just a part of the story. So she had been done speaking, and people were standing in a line to shake her hand. And so this guard comes forward. And here's what happens. Now he was in front of me, hand thrust out. A fine message, Fräulein. How good it is to know that, as you say, all our sins are at the bottom of the sea. And I, who had spoken so glibly of forgiveness, fumbled in my pocketbook rather than take that hand. He would not remember me, of course. How could he remember one prisoner among those thousands of women? But I remembered him and the leather crop swinging from his belt. I was face to face with one of my captors, and my blood seemed to freeze. You mentioned Ravensbrück, which is where she was. In your talk, he said, I was a guard there. No, he did not remember me. But since that time, he went on, I have become a Christian. I know that God has forgiven me for the cruel things I did there, but I would like to hear it from your lips as well. Fräulein, will you forgive me? And I stood there, I whose sins had again and again to be forgiven. I could not forgive. Betsy, her sister, had died in that place. Could he erase her slow, terrible death simply for the asking? It could not have been many seconds that he stood there, hand held out. But to me it seemed hours, and I wrestled with the most difficult thing I ever had to do. For I had to do it. I knew that. The message that God forgives has a prior condition, that we forgive those who have injured us. If you do not forgive men their trespasses, Jesus says, neither will your Father in heaven forgive your trespasses. I knew it not only as a commandment of God, but as a daily experience. Since the end of the war, I had had a home in Holland for victims of Nazi brutality. Those who were able to forgive their former enemies were able to also return to the outside world and rebuild their lives, no matter what the physical scars. Those who nursed their bitterness remained invalids. It was as simple and as horrible as that. And still I stood there with the coldness clutching my heart. But forgiveness is not an emotion. I knew that too. Forgiveness is an act of the will. And the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart. Help, I prayed silently. I can lift my hand. That much I can do. You supply the feeling. And so woodenly, mechanically, I thrust my hand into the one who stretched out to me. And as I did, an incredible thing took place. The current started in my shoulder, raced down my arm, sprang into our joined hands, and then this healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being, bringing tears to my eyes. I forgive you, brother, I cried, with all my heart. Now, that's an extreme story. That's an extreme example. But the reality is that when people put us down, when people try to make us lower than themselves, Jesus said the normal response for the world is to stand up and say, no, I am just as good as you. But in my kingdom, we are humble servants. He didn't say it'd be easy. But he said, when you're rightly connected to me, when you're following after me, when everything in our relationship is what it should be, that's who you're going to be. Yes, you matter. Yes, you're important. But it's not your job to be important to the world. It's your job to be a servant. And sometimes serving people means letting them think they're above you. Again, I can tell you what it says, and I can teach it to you, but it's a big hurdle to climb. And so Jesus lays out this incredibly high standard. He says, listen, in my kingdom, other people are going to be more important than you. We see in Romans 12, Paul says it clearly that we should always put ourselves below others. And here's the frustrating part about Jesus. It's how he lived his life. The very soldiers that spit on him and beat him beyond recognition, put a crown of thorns on his head, put spikes in his hands and his feet. Father, forgive them. They don't understand. Whew. So he said, this is what you should look like. This is how it's done. Now it's your turn. So he goes on, and he gives those three illustrations and says, there are going to be times in your life when people look down on you. There are going to be times in your life when they put themselves above you. That's okay. Because in my kingdom, the goal is not to be the best on earth, but to be who I want you to be in my kingdom. Whew, sometimes we get that mixed up. So he goes on then, and he flips the tables. And so if you look at the last verse, there, anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Verse 42, give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. And I've always looked at that, that just seems so out of place. But when you realize that Jesus is talking about humility, what he's saying is the exact opposite. What he's saying now is, listen, when someone comes to you, and they're below you, when in society's standards they're beneath you, don't you dare slap them. Don't you dare put them below you. If they need help, you take care of that in private. You don't make a public display of them. If they need help, you intervene as best you can. If they need help, it is your job in my kingdom to lift people up, not tear them down. It's so easy, and I think we're all guilty of this at times. When we see people who are hurting, we see people that need something, our first thought is all the things they've done wrong. Man, if you'd have just done A, B, and C, you wouldn't find yourself in this situation. Jesus says, no, that's not what this is about. When someone comes into your life and they need to be loved, you need to love. See, he's not talking about giving everything away here, though that may be required. He's not talking about selling all you have and giving away to the poor, though in some cases, like the rich young ruler, that's what he expected. But what he's saying is people matter to me. And how dare you put them below you? Because the reality is we're not better than anyone. The only thing that makes us valuable is his love for us. Man, we forget that. We've been forgiven. That's what separates us from the non-believer. So we've been forgiven. And so Jesus says that we need to lift others up, that we need to encourage them. James, when he wrote his book in chapter 2, he was dealing with a problem that the early church had. And the early church had this problem that they had become respecters of people. And what James says is now what's going on, guys, is that when people come to your worship experience, who are poor, you tell them to go sit in the corner. But when people who are wealthy and come to your worship experience, you tell them, have this good chair. And he says, you are being a respecter of people. You're creating a standard that the world lives by, and you're bringing it into the church. He says, no, you can't do that. How dare you, James says. How dare you do that? Because all people matter equally to God. So when we get to verse 42, I think Jesus is saying, listen, you're not above anybody. You're here to serve people. You're here to care for them. And you're here to lift them up, not push them down. Now imagine with me what would happen in our world if followers of Jesus actually did that. If instead of condemning people because of their political beliefs, or because of their gender, or because of their ethnicity, that we pick people up? What difference would it make in the world if the followers of Jesus would actually live like Jesus? To the point that all people matter. Sometimes we get so worried about our convictions that we forget about loving people. And the world so desperately needs to see that they matter. One of the things, and we've worked very hard to try to do that around here, one of the new things that's going on, and you may or may not know, there's a group called Westside Christian Outreach, the WESCO for short, that we give money to every month. And what happens is that the churches on the west side pool their funds, and we help people in need. So if somebody needs help with a light bill, they'll help a little bit. If somebody needs food, we do that. And because of some bizarre circumstances, if you want to know those, you can talk to me later. Because of some bizarre circumstances, Wesco is now using one of our mission houses to operate out of. And it worked out that way, and it was really a good thing. But I tell you that because one of the things that is very clear in Wesco's declaration of who they're going to be, it's not about who you are, it's not about where you come from, it's not about your background. If you're in need, we'll help as best we can. And doggone it, that's so like Jesus. And that's so who he's called us to be. And so when Jesus gets to this point in the Sermon on the Mount, he's confronting an issue that the Jewish people had. He's confronting an issue that we have. That we give people value based on different characteristics of who they are, usually based on how much money they have or what position they have. Jesus said, that doesn't work for me. Because your standard of greatness is not the one that matters. It's my standard of greatness. So there is this incredibly important call to lift others up and encourage them and help them instead of putting them below ourselves. So we've been talking about this, and each time we've been talking about, for some people, these are strongholds that you may have in your life. And how do I overcome this? How do I move past this stronghold that may be reigning in my life? And so we've been using the VIM. And so the V is the vision. And the vision is a vision of seeing everybody the way God sees them. The vision is not trying to make myself more important in the world's eyes. The vision is not putting anybody below me. The vision is to see the world and see people outside of the kingdom just as God does. And realizing that the only difference between me and the non-believer is I've been forgiven. And the Spirit of Christ lived within me. And but for the grace of God, I'd be just like them. And that's the vision, to see the world through God's eyes. The I then is the intention, and this is the big hurdle for most of us, is that I really want to be that way. I really want to see people the way God sees them. I really want to go through this journey of life and interact with people the way Jesus would if he were me. And many times we get stuck on that. The M is the means, then how do I do this? If you're like me, you realize I can't do it. I can't do it unless the Spirit of Christ does it through me. And through prayer and relationship, I say, Lord, I want to see the world like you do. Please help me do that. Please take off these judgmental glasses that I have. Please take off these thoughts in my head that people should live a certain way or I really shouldn't help them. Please take off this idea that the world has taught us that value is based on the sum of a person's possessions. Take those glasses off of me. And please help me. May your Spirit guide me to see the world the way you see them. And then the next step is interact with those people that are the hardest to interact with. Ken, I'm not calling you to give all your money away. God may do that. That's his business. But what is it like to interact with someone who chooses to be homeless? What is it like to interact with someone who has a completely different belief system than me? Whether it's atheist, agnostic, or Buddhist. What does it look like to interact with someone who is totally different than me politically? To interact with someone whose station in life is above me or below me. And you know what you find out? They're all people. And they're all loved by God. So we ask for his perspective and his guidance and his leadership. And here's what I'm going to tell you. When followers of Jesus will start doing that, it will change the world. When people experience God's love, especially those who don't deserve it, which is all of us, it will change the world. Let's pray.